I actually asked him, yes. I said, if it's possible, would you let me know, am I under investigation? He said, you are not under investigation.
President Trump talking about a surprising conversation where James Comey supposedly cleared him in the FBI investigation of possible links between the Trump campaign and Russian interference in the 2016 election. And it's time now for our Sunday group, GOP strategist Karl Rove, Bob Woodward from the Washington Post, Julie Pace, who covers the White House for the Associated Press, and Josh Holmes, Mitch McConnell's former chief of staff and a GOP strategist. Well, Bob, there's obviously been a lot of talk this week about parallels between this and Watergate. The president firing the man who was leading the investigation that could potentially take him down, shifting stories. Now the suggestion of a possible taping system inside the White House. Obviously, there are big differences, and the biggest is that we knew early on of a crime having been committed in Watergate. We don't know that so far, but as someone who was on the front lines of Watergate, what are the similarities you see this week, and what are the big differences?
Well, there are a lot of questions. I was fascinated with what Senator Warner had to say. I think he adopted this position of we're going to give the president the benefit of the doubt, but he then raised about 10 questions, which I think need to be answered. But this is not yet Watergate, not a clear crime. On the Russian issue, as Senator Warner and others have said, there are 1,000 questions, and they should be answered. But there's no evidence that President Trump, at this point, was somehow involved in collusion here. That's an important...
What about his actions, though?
Well, his actions are strange and unpredictable and impulsive as always. But in the case of Nixon, he had his former White House counsel, John Dean, for 4 days testifying that the president corruptly and illegally led the obstruction of justice. And you have nothing comparable. Now, that doesn't mean we don't know where this is going to go. There is an immense amount of smoke. The other problem here is Senator Warner was saying if there are tapes, he would like to get the tapes, the Senate get the tapes. In the case of Nixon, back in 1974, the Supreme Court ruled that a special prosecutor or a prosecutor can get tapes if it's demonstrated that they're admissible and relevant, but not a Senate committee. So there were, and the White House posture on this, we're not answering. Did he tape? Trump has a history of this. I think one of the lessons of Watergate is don't tape.
and also destroy them if somebody asks for them. We ask you for questions for the panel, and we got this from Joe Ranger on Facebook. Given the poor optics and potential for further strife within the Republican Party, will President Trump regret how this was handled? Karl, as someone who worked very closely in the Oval Office for years, what do you make of President Trump's actions and statements this week?
Look, he had the authority to do what he did, and he had reason to, by what Comey had done in July and what Comey had done in October, and then the fact that he showed no sentiment in his testimony and no regret about having done what he did last year. But having said that, this was done in a way, if you could figure out how to do something good and do it right, and then figure out how to do it exactly the opposite, they chose exactly the opposite. They made him look petty. He fires Comey while Comey is on the West Coast. They don't even know that Comey is in Los Angeles when they send the beefy ex-security chief for the current president over with a manila folder containing the document. They don't have a communication strategy. They don't have their act together with regard to what they're going to say. And then after they finally start saying on Tuesday night late and on Wednesday, we did it because the Deputy Attorney General gave us a good explanation of why we should. On Thursday, the president undercuts his own spokesman by saying, well, it didn't matter. I was going to fire him anyway. And it virtually in the next sentence says, and it was because I'm upset about the Russia investigation. And this is only going to provoke greater controversy. And it's only going to provoke people to question the president's trustworthiness, his credibility, and the reasons for his actions. And it is going to guarantee that there's going to be a very serious serious investigation by the FBI, and that the next FBI director will only be approved after Congress grills them and pins them to the fire on, will you conduct an independent investigation that gets to the bottom of all these issues?
And then, as if that weren't enough, there was the astonishing suggestion on Friday, both by the president and then in a non-denial by Sean Spicer, that the president may have set up a recording system in the White House. On Fox News, Judge Jeanine asked the president about this.
What about the idea that in a tweet you said that there might be tape recordings?
Well, that I can't talk about. I won't talk about that.
Julie, I have to say it took my breath away when I heard that. What do you make of that? Do you think the president is just trolling the media and his critics? Do you think there's a real possibility that he has set up a taping system?
Well, I think it's important to note that with President Trump, when he was in business and when he was a candidate, people who worked for him largely assumed that their conversations with him were being taped. In his New York offices, people generally worked under that assumption. So the idea that he would be taping conversations is not out of the realm of possibility. Of course, it's much different when you're talking about conversations in the Oval Office, particularly if they're being recorded secretly. But the mere fact that we're having this conversation is really extraordinary. And you have to put it, again, in some context. This is a president who was extremely frustrated with the way that the rollout of Comey's firing was handled. He felt like he needed to step in there. He needed to be his own spokesperson. But in doing so, both in the interviews that he did and in his tweets, he only created more headaches and potentially legal headaches for his White House.
Yeah, that's one of the astonishing things is it seemed to me, and we're told, that he had no legal counsel before he went out and talked. And there are all kinds of potential issues, legal issues he raised. I want to talk about the other central figure in all this, and that's James Comey. It's been reported that his testimony before Congress the week before last upset the president. Here's a taste of that testimony.
It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. I stared at speak and conceal. Speak would be really bad. There's an election in 11 days. Lordy, that would be really bad. Concealing, in my view, would be catastrophic.
Josh, there are two competing narratives about James Comey. One is that he is an incorruptible straight shooter. The other, as the president said, is that he is a showboat and a grandstander. From your point of view, you're a GOP strategist. Did Comey overstep his situation as FBI director, his role, and did he need to go?
Yeah, I think there's no question about it, Chris. I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in public office where there's more bipartisan consensus about whether or not they were the best person to lead the department. We've got everybody from Democrats across the board ideologically.
Yeah, of course, a lot of them pulled that back this week.
Sure, and that sort of gives you whiplash, too. But I think that the important part is, was he the best person to lead the department? And I think there was broad bipartisan consensus that he was not. And so the decision in and of itself to remove him as director of FBI, I don't think should be all that controversial. It's the timing, of course, which gives people pause, but also the rollout. And I think what's happened here is that the administration has created a lot more smoke for itself than is necessary. The investigation that Director Comey and the FBI are undertaking goes on. The idea that in 2017 you can somehow bury an FBI investigation by firing the director is laughable at best. And there's two other separate congressional investigations that are happening simultaneously. So we're going to get to the bottom of this regardless of whether Director Comey is at the FBI or not.
If you wonder what we talk about during the commercials, Josh Holmes is really very close to Mitch McConnell. He was his chief of staff. He was the person who helped get him reelected this last time. And you said you spoke to the senator this morning.
I did. He was watching Mike Lee's interview and the suggestion that Merrick Garland be the next director of the FBI. And I think the Senate Majority Leader thinks that's a fantastic idea. It's somebody who obviously Democrats have significant trust and respect for. They've articulated that over the last year, and someone who could do the job impartially. And I think he's going to be prepared to make that suggestion.
To the president?
Yes.
So that's his choice. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader's choice for the replacement is Judge Merrick Garland?
He certainly thinks that he would be qualified, and he certainly thinks that he would be somebody that he could support.
That's the kind of thing that happens here during the commercials. Panel, we have to take a break here.